The ballroom glittered like something out of a dream. Golden chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, scattering light across the marble floors. The sound of soft laughter mixed with the clinking of glasses and the low hum of a jazz band playing in the corner. Everyone in the room looked perfect. Men in tailored tuxedos, women in sparkling gowns, all moving as if they were born to be part of this glamorous world. Elena moved quietly between the tables, balancing a silver tray in her hands. She tried to keep her eyes down, her steps careful. She had been working since early morning, and her feet hurt inside the black shoes she'd bought from a second-hand shop, but she couldn't complain. This job, though tiring, was the only thing helping her pay her rent and her mother's medical bills. Every tip mattered. Every smile to a guest meant she might earn a little more. She didn't belong in a place like this, and she knew it. The rich laughed easily, their perfume filling the air, their voices smooth and confident. They didn't notice the staff, not the waiters who refilled their champagne or the cleaners who picked up after them. Elena had learned to move like a shadow, unseen and silent. In one corner of the room sat Alexander Vale, the man everyone seemed to circle around. People whispered his name in admiration and fear. A billionaire investor and known for his charm as much as his coldness. He was in his early 40s, tall, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. His suit was black, perfectly fitted, and his watch probably cost more than Elena made in a year. When he laughed, others laughed with him, even if he wasn't joking. When he looked bored, everyone scrambled to entertain him. Tonight, Alexander looked bored. He swirled the wine in his glass and glanced at the stage where a small jazz trio played. The pianist was decent, the music smooth, but his expression was dull. He was used to better, used to being impressed. To him, everything and everyone at these events eventually started to look the same. Elena passed by his table once, setting down a drink for one of the guests. She didn't dare look directly at him, but she felt his eyes on her for a brief second. Cold, curious, as if he were trying to remember if he'd seen her before. She moved away quickly. The evening went on. Laughter, chatter, polite clapping for speeches. The kind of night that would end with everyone congratulating themselves for their generosity, while Elena and the other staff cleaned up the leftovers. But for now, the music played, and she focused on not making mistakes. Still, her mind wandered. Every time she passed the piano, she felt a tug inside her. She used to love playing. Music had once been her whole world. As a child, she would sit for hours at her father's old upright piano, losing herself in melodies. Her father used to say she had a gift, that when she played, the room listened. But that was before he died, before bills and hospital visits and long shifts replaced dreams. She hadn't touched a piano in years. As she reached for another tray, she caught a glimpse of the pianist packing up. He looked frustrated, talking to one of the organizers. Then Elena overheard a few words. The pianist wasn't feeling well.
He couldn't continue the evening.
The organizer looked panicked. There was still an hour left before dinner was to be served, and the billionaire guests expected to be entertained. Alexander noticed the commotion and raised an eyebrow. "What's the problem?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying a quiet authority. The organizer stammered an explanation. "The pianist, sir, he's unable to play any further. We're trying to find a replacement, but—" Alexander leaned back in his chair, amused. "A room full of people and no one can play a few simple notes?" he said dryly. A few guests chuckled, eager to stay on his good side. That's when one of the waiters, trying to be helpful, spoke up. "I think one of the waitresses, the young one, she said she used to play," he said, nodding toward Elena. Elena froze. Her heart jumped into her throat. The waiter looked sorry the moment the words left his mouth. Alexander turned his gaze toward her, interest flickering in his eyes. "Is that true?" he asked. She swallowed hard. "I used to, sir. A long time ago." He tilted his head slightly, a faint smirk forming. "Then maybe you can help us. Sit at the piano. Play something." Elena felt her knees weaken. I can't, sir. I haven't played in years." "Then tonight's a good time to remember," he replied, his tone smooth but cutting. "Go on, we're all waiting." The guests began to whisper. Some laughed softly, assuming it was a joke, but Alexander's expression showed he wasn't joking. The band member stepped aside uncertainly as Elena walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavier than the last. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her. Her hands trembled as she sat down. The piano gleamed under the golden lights, beautiful, intimidating. For a moment she wanted to run, to say no, to disappear. But then she remembered her mother's voice, weak but loving, telling her once, "You were born to be brave, my little songbird." Elena took a deep breath and placed her fingers gently on the keys. The room waited, some amused, some curious, one man watching with an unreadable look in his eyes. And in that moment, surrounded by wealth, pride, and silence, a waitress was about to remind them all what real grace sounded like. "Would you like me to continue part 2, the challenge?" In the same, Elena sat frozen at the piano, her hands hovering above the keys, the weight of every gaze pressing down on her. The laughter and chatter that had once filled the ballroom had vanished. Now there was only a thick, expectant silence, the kind that made her heart pound louder than any drumbeat. Alexander Vale leaned back in his chair, one eyebrow raised, a faint curl of amusement on his lips. To him this was entertainment, a small disruption to break the monotony of a perfect night. To Elena, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff with nowhere to run. She swallowed hard, her mind scrambling. Her fingers touched the cool ivory keys, but they felt like strangers. It had been so long since she'd played that her memory of music lived somewhere deep, buried beneath years of exhaustion and forgotten dreams. "Go on," Alexander said, his voice smooth but commanding. "Surely you still remember how." A few guests chuckled under their breath. Others whispered softly, waiting to see her fail. Elena felt her cheeks grow warm. She looked out across the glittering tables, the golden chandeliers above her, the eyes filled with either pity or boredom. For a moment, she thought of standing up, of shaking her head and walking away. But then she saw the head waiter watching her nervously, and she remembered she couldn't afford to lose this job. One mistake and she'd be replaced. She pressed down on one key, a single soft note that barely carried across the room. Her hands trembled. The sound was thin, uncertain. A few people smiled politely as if watching a child perform. Alexander's smirk deepened. "Maybe start with something simple," he said, his tone casual but his words sharp enough to sting. Elena closed her eyes for a second. She could almost hear her father's voice again. "Music isn't about showing off, Lena. It's about speaking when words can't." She took a breath and began again. This time both hands touched the keys. A melody started to form, hesitant but real. It was uneven, the rhythm slipping now and then, but it was music. Her fingers found patterns they hadn't forgotten completely, muscle memory waking up like a long sleeping friend. But as she played, she could feel the weight of judgment from the room. People whispered, a few exchanged glances. The sound of quiet disappointment filled the air louder than her song. When she glanced up briefly, she saw Alexander sipping his wine, unimpressed. His expression said it all. I was right, something inside her twisted. She hated that look and that smug certainty. He thought he knew her, thought he could humiliate her and move on, just another story to tell his rich friends. He didn't know the girl who had once practiced for hours until her fingers ached, who had dreamed of concert halls before life turned cruel. The melody faltered. Her fingers paused mid-air. For a heartbeat, the room hung in silence again. Then softly but clearly she said, "I'm sorry." She stood up from the piano bench. "I shouldn't have." But before she could finish, Alexander spoke. "Sit," he said simply. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried authority that made everyone freeze. "You don't walk away before you finish what you started." Elena turned to face him, her jaw tightening. Something in his gaze had changed. It wasn't just mockery now. There was challenge in it, curiosity. He leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on her. "You've played before," he said. "I can tell. Don't waste our time pretending you can't." A few guests murmured in surprise at his bluntness. Someone whispered, "He's being cruel." Another said, "He's pushing her." But no one dared interrupt. Elena looked at him, her fear slowly melting into something else. Anger. Anger at his arrogance, at the laughter around her, at the life that had pushed her into serving people who didn't even see her as human. Fine, she thought. If he wants music, I'll give him music. She sat back down, her spine straight, her breath steadying. She placed her fingers on the keys again. But this time she didn't play the soft, broken notes of a scared waitress. She chose a melody her father used to play, one full of fire, sorrow, and longing. Used to play one full of fire, sorrow, and longing. The first few notes rang out sharp and clear. The sound cut through the air like lightning, startling those who had drifted into half-interest. Her hands moved faster now, remembering, feeling, commanding. Each chord carried emotion, frustration, grief, strength. People stopped whispering. Heads turned. Even the waiters froze in their steps. The music swelled, filling the golden hall with something raw and alive. Alexander leaned back, surprised. His amusement faded. The woman he had forced onto that piano wasn't a frightened servant anymore. She was a storm. The guests who had once looked at her with pity now watched with awe. The melody rose higher, building emotion with every measure. Elena's heart raced, but her fingers didn't falter. For the first time in years, she felt free, not just from fear, but from everything that had chained her. When she reached the final note, she held it, letting it ring out and fade into the silence. The sound lingered as if the room itself didn't want to let it go. For a long moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then a slow clap started, soft, hesitant, and grew louder until the entire room erupted into applause. Elena sat still, staring at the piano keys, her chest rising and falling. She hadn't played perfectly. There were flaws, missed beats, but it didn't matter. Something inside her had awakened. Alexander stood slowly, his expression unreadable. His eyes met hers across the room, and for the first time there was no arrogance in them, only respect. Maybe even a trace of shame. Elena rose from the bench, bowed slightly, and turned to leave. The applause followed her out the door. Behind her, Alexander's voice was quiet but certain. That was no ordinary waitress. And though she didn't hear him, she already knew. That night had changed something. Not just for her, but for everyone who had listened. Elena stood backstage for a long moment after the applause faded, her hands still trembling. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Her heart pounded in her chest and her breath came in uneven bursts. It felt as though she had just woken up from a dream, or maybe from a nightmare that had suddenly turned into something else. When she finally returned to the serving area, the other staff stared at her with wide eyes. Some smiled in disbelief. Others whispered as she passed. "You were amazing," one of the waiters said softly. "I didn't know you could play like that." Elena forced a small smile, still dazed. "Neither did I," she whispered back, but her peace didn't last long. A few minutes later, the head waiter approached her nervously. "Elena, Mr. Vale asked to see you," he said in a low tone. Her stomach dropped. Of course. The billionaire who had forced her onto the piano wouldn't just let her disappear quietly. She hesitated, glancing down at her simple uniform, her hands still marked with faint traces of cleaning polish. "Now?" she asked. "Yes, now," he said. "He's waiting near the balcony." Elena took a deep breath and followed the sound of laughter and conversation until she found him standing by the tall glass doors that opened to the night sky. Alexander Vale turned as she approached, his expression unreadable. The city lights flickered behind him like distant stars. "You play beautifully," he said finally, his tone calmer now, almost sincere. "Thank you," she replied, her voice quiet. He studied her for a moment, the corners of his mouth twitching as if he was trying to decide something. "You surprised me," he said. "I didn't expect that." Elena lowered her gaze. "You didn't expect me to know how to play at all," she said softly. Alexander didn't deny it. "You're right. I didn't." There was an awkward silence between them. The sounds of the gala continued behind them. Music, laughter, glasses clinking. But out here everything felt distant, fragile. Finally, he spoke again. "You should never hide that kind of talent," he said. "It doesn't belong behind a tray." Elena looked up at him, then meeting his sharp, pale eyes.
"Talent doesn't pay hospital bills," she said.
Her words were simple but heavy. Alexander's confident expression faltered for the first time that evening. He looked as if he wanted to say something, but she gave a polite nod and walked away before he could. That night, after the event ended, she walked home through quiet streets, her shoes clicking softly against the pavement. The city lights reflected off wet cobblestones, and her reflection in every shop window looked like someone else. Someone she hadn't been in a long time. Her apartment was small but warm. Her mother was asleep on the couch, a soft blanket covering her frail frame. Elena knelt beside her and brushed a hand gently over her mother's hair. "I played again, Mama," she whispered. "I really played." She didn't expect an answer, but her mother stirred slightly, smiling faintly in her sleep, as if she could hear the music still. The next morning, Elena woke up to her phone buzzing nonstop. She frowned and picked it up, her eyes widening as she saw her social media flooded with messages. Someone at the gala had recorded her performance and posted it online. The video had gone viral overnight. Waitress shocks billionaire gala with haunting piano performance. Who is the mysterious woman who silenced the elite crowd? Comments poured in, people praising her, others curious about her story. Her hands shook as she scrolled. This wasn't supposed to happen. She never wanted attention. At the cafe where she worked mornings, people whispered and pointed. Some recognized her from the video. Others asked if it was really her. The owner looked proud but worried. Attention wasn't always good in their part of the city. Later that day, while she was wiping down tables, a tall man in a gray suit walked in. He looked out of place in the small cafe, his shoes too polished for the scuffed floor. "Elena Torres?" he asked. "Yes," she said cautiously. He handed her an envelope. "From Mr. Alexander Vale." Then he left without another word. Elena stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside was a simple note written in elegant handwriting. "You have a gift the world deserves to hear again. Don't let life silence it. A.V." Below the note was a business card for a private music academy, one she had once dreamed of attending when she was younger. And beneath that was a check large enough to pay off her debts and her mother's medical treatment. Elena's first instinct was disbelief, followed by anger. Did he think he could buy forgiveness? That money could erase the humiliation she'd felt before she played. She folded the check carefully and placed it back in the envelope. She didn't tear it up, but she didn't cash it either. Not yet. That evening, she walked to a nearby park where an old, weathered piano sat under a gazebo, a forgotten community donation. The keys were chipped and yellowed, but when she pressed them, the sound still came. She played softly, a melody that drifted through the trees as the sun set. Children stopped to listen. A man walking his dog paused nearby. For the first time, she wasn't playing because someone forced her to. She wasn't playing for tips or applause. She was playing because it made her feel alive. And as the final notes faded into the twilight, she realized something. The billionaire may have pushed her onto that stage, but the music and the courage had been hers all along. That night, as she walked home, she looked up at the city lights again. They didn't seem so far away anymore. The next few days felt unreal for Elena. Everywhere she went, people seemed to know her name. At the cafe, customers asked for photos. On social media, strangers sent her messages. Some kind, some curious, some strange. "Are you really the waitress who played for that billionaire? What was it like to silence a room full of rich people? Your music made me cry." Elena didn't know how to answer any of them. She didn't feel like a celebrity. She still took the bus to work, still counted coins for rent, still worried about her mother's medicine. The only thing that had changed was that the world had noticed her, and she didn't know if that was a blessing or a curse. One evening, after another long shift, she sat by the window of her small apartment. The city outside buzzed with life. Neon lights, distant horns, laughter echoing from bars down the street. Inside, the room was quiet except for the soft breathing of her mother asleep nearby. On the table in front of her lay the envelope Alexander had sent. She traced the edge of it with her fingers, torn between gratitude and pride. She hadn't touched the money, but the business card from the music academy kept catching her eye. It was the same academy her father used to talk about. "You'll go there someday, Lena," he had told her once, smiling as his rough fingers guided hers across the piano keys. "Not because we're rich, but because you'll earn it." That was before everything changed. Her father, Miguel Torres, had been a music teacher at a local school. He wasn't famous, but he was passionate. He taught his students that music wasn't just notes and it was emotion, it was truth. Elena had inherited that from him. By the time she was 12, she could play pieces that made adults tear up. But life has a cruel way of silencing beauty. When her father got sick, their small savings vanished in hospital bills. The piano lesson stopped. The upright piano, the one that filled their tiny apartment with sound, was sold to pay debts. The day it was taken away, Elena had cried silently in the hallway, her hands clutching the old sheet music like treasure. Her mother had promised that someday, when things got better, they'd buy another one. But better, they'd buy another one. But someday never came. Now, years later, sitting under a flickering kitchen light, Elena felt those memories press against her heart like a song she'd forgotten the lyrics to. She opened the envelope again and stared at the check. 1,000 emotions tangled inside her. Pride, shame, hope, anger. She didn't want to be someone's charity case, not even a billionaire's. But she also couldn't ignore the truth. This money could change everything. It could give her mother the care she needed. It could buy her time to breathe, to dream again. That night, she made a decision. The next morning, she took the subway to the academy printed on the card, the Vale Conservatory of Music. The name made her hesitate, realizing it belonged to Alexander himself. Of course it did. He didn't just donate money to the arts. He owned the school that trained future stars. The building was grand but peaceful, its halls filled with faint echoes of piano music. Students carried instruments, their laughter light and effortless. Elena felt out of place among them, still wearing her worn-out shoes and a plain coat. At the reception desk, a woman looked up politely. "Can I help you?" Elena took a breath. "I played at the Rosemont Gala last week," she said quietly. Recognition flashed in the woman's eyes. "Oh, you're her," she said warmly. "We've seen the video. It's breathtaking." "I'm not here for that," Elena said quickly. "I just wanted to ask, do you take adult students?" "Of course," the woman said. "But the fees—" "I know," Elena interrupted gently. "I have something that might help." She placed the envelope on the counter, the check inside. The woman unfolded it and her eyes widened slightly. "This would more than cover your tuition." Elena nodded. "Then I'd like to enroll. I don't want special treatment. I just want to learn again." The woman smiled, handing her a simple form. "You're going to fit right in, Miss Torres." As Elena filled it out, she felt her hands shaking again. Not from fear this time, but from disbelief. For the first time in years, she was choosing music, not survival. When she left the academy that afternoon, the sun was setting, painting the sky gold and pink. She sat on the steps outside, watching students come and go, laughter echoing around her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. That night, she told her mother everything. "You're really going back?" Her mother asked softly, her tired eyes lighting up. Elena smiled. "Yes, Mama, I'm going back." Her mother reached for her hand. "Your father would be so proud." Tears filled Elena's eyes, but they weren't sad ones. "I think he already knows," she whispered. Later, as she lay in bed, she couldn't stop hearing the sound of piano keys in her mind. Not the heavy, fearful notes she'd played that night at the gala, but soft, hopeful ones. The sound of beginnings. She didn't know if she'd ever see Alexander Vale again. She didn't know if he truly cared or if he was just trying to fix a guilty conscience. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that his careless challenge had pushed her back toward the life she'd almost lost. And as she drifted to sleep, she realized something her father had once told her was still true. Sometimes the hardest songs to play are the ones that make us whole again. The morning sun spilled through the tall glass windows of the conservatory, painting the marble floors in warm gold. Elena stood just inside the doorway, holding her bag tightly to her chest. The smell of polished wood and faint echoes of piano scales filled the air. It felt like stepping into another world, one she had once dreamed of but never thought she'd see again. Her first day of classes had arrived. She looked around nervously. The students who hurried through the hallways looked confident, stylish, and young. Their laughter bounced off the walls, and their fingers carried sheet music, folders, and dreams that had never been broken. Elena, in her modest clothes and slightly worn shoes, felt like an outsider once again. Her first class was a piano workshop. She entered quietly, choosing a seat in the back. There were 5 grand pianos arranged in a semicircle, and the instructor, an older man with silver hair and a kind face, smiled warmly at the students. "Welcome, everyone," he said. "Music isn't just sound. It's emotion, memory, and truth. Today we'll start by learning not to play the notes, but to feel them." His words made Elena's heart ache a little. She had heard almost the same thing from her father when she was a child. She could almost hear his voice again, teasing her gently. "Don't fight the piano, Lena. Let it speak." The instructor asked each student to introduce themselves. When it was her turn, she hesitated, then said softly, "My name is Elena Torres. I'm returning to music after a long time." Some students smiled politely. One girl, elegant and sharp-looking, raised an eyebrow as if trying to remember where she had seen Elena before. Then it clicked, the viral video. Whispered voices followed, a few curious glances. Elena pretended not to notice and focused on the piano in front of her. When her turn came to play, she hesitated again. The instructor nodded encouragingly. "Take your time." Elena placed her fingers on the keys. They were smooth, cool, familiar. She started with something simple, a gentle classical piece she had learned long ago. The first few notes wavered, but soon her body relaxed. The melody flowed, soft and sincere. By the time she finished, the room was silent. The instructor smiled. "You play with heart," he said quietly. "That's something no technique can teach." Those words stayed with her the whole day. Weeks passed. Elena began to find her rhythm again. She practiced late into the evening, sometimes until the janitors came by to lock the doors. She played through exhaustion, through pain, through doubt. Music slowly began to rebuild her, note by note, chord by chord. But not everyone was kind. The same elegant girl from her first day, her name was Clara Vale, and yes, she was Alexander's niece, often made quiet remarks when Elena passed. "Must be nice to have a billionaire's attention," Clara said one day during break. Her tone sugary but sharp. "Most of us have to earn our place here." Elena blinked, stunned. "I didn't ask for anyone's attention," she said simply. Clara smirked. "No, but you got it anyway. People are talking, about how Uncle Alex found his prodigy in a restaurant." The word stung more than Elena wanted to admit. She turned away, refusing to argue. She didn't come here to prove herself to spoiled heirs. She came to remember who she was. That night she stayed behind after everyone left. The classroom was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a single lamp. She sat at the grand piano and began to play, slow, emotional, wordless music that came from somewhere deep inside. Every key she touched carried a memory. Her father's smile, her mother's laughter, the night of the gala, the feeling of being seen for the first time in years. The melody grew stronger, louder, until it filled the empty room completely. And that's when she heard the sound of hands clapping. She turned sharply. Standing in the doorway was Alexander Vale himself. He looked different tonight. No fancy tuxedo, no arrogance. Just a man in a dark coat, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "You play even better when no one's watching," he said. Elena's heart skipped. "What are you doing here?" "I came to hear you," he replied simply. "Clara told me you enrolled." "I wanted to see for myself." She hesitated. "You didn't have to. I'm not one of your projects." Alexander walked closer, his gaze steady. "I know," he said quietly. "And I don't want you to be. I just wanted to understand what it was I heard that night. That sound that stopped the world for a moment." Elena's voice softened. "It wasn't me who stopped it. It was the music." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's what I needed. Something to stop my world for once." For a moment they stood in silence, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock. Elena didn't know what to say. She didn't know if she should thank him or tell him to leave. But before she could speak, he placed a small envelope on the piano. "It's not money," he said quickly, reading her expression. "It's an invitation. There's a charity concert next month. I think you should play." Elena's eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes, you," he said. "Not as a waitress. As a pianist." She looked at the envelope, her pulse quickening. The thought of performing again, for an audience, for the same kind of people who once mocked her, was terrifying. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. Alexander met her gaze steadily. "You already did." Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the hall. Elena sat there for a long time, staring at the invitation. Her fingers brushed the piano keys again, and she felt that same spark she'd felt the night of the gala, fear and excitement mixing into something powerful. She smiled faintly to herself, maybe. This was what her father meant when he said music could open doors that life had closed, and maybe, just maybe, this was the door she was finally ready to walk through. The night of the charity concert arrived faster than Elena expected. In the days leading up to it, she practiced until her hands ached. Every morning she'd arrive early at the conservatory, her fingers tracing the same keys over and over. The melody she had chosen wasn't a famous one. It was her own. Something she had written quietly at home late at night when her mother was asleep. It told her story, the struggle, the loss, the rediscovery of hope. When she first played it for her teacher, he had looked up from his notes with glassy eyes. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "It's not just music, Elena, it's you." Now, standing backstage at the city's grandest concert hall, that thought both comforted and terrified her. The hall was enormous, its chandeliers brighter and higher than the ones at the gala. The audience was filled with people dressed in their best, business magnates, politicians, actors, and the same kind of elite faces she once served drinks to. And somewhere among them sat Alexander Vale. Elena peeked through the curtain once and spotted him in the front row. He looked calm, almost proud. She quickly turned away, her pulse racing. She hadn't seen him since the night he gave her the invitation. She still didn't know what to think of him. Gratitude? Anger? Respect? Maybe all three. "Miss Torres," a voice called gently. The stage manager smiled at her. "You're next," Elena nodded. Her palms were damp, her throat dry. She wiped her hands on her dress, a simple pale blue gown the Academy had lent her. It wasn't expensive, but it made her feel like herself, not like the invisible waitress she once was. She took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The lights blinded her for a moment. The sea of faces blurred together, hundreds of eyes following her every move. Her heels clicked softly against the wooden floor as she walked toward the piano, a magnificent black Steinway that gleamed under the spotlight. For a second, the sound of the crowd faded, replaced by the familiar pounding of her heart. Then she sat, her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. 1,000 memories flooded her mind, her father's laughter, the night of the gala, her mother's tired smile, the way she used to press her ear to the piano as a child to feel the music more than hear it. She closed her eyes, and then she began. The first notes were soft, delicate as falling snow. The melody rose gently, uncertain but graceful, like a hesitant voice learning to speak again. The audience leaned forward. As the piece grew, so did Elena's confidence. Her body moved with the rhythm, her fingers flowing across the keys as if the piano were breathing with her. Every note told a part of her life, the ache of struggle, the quiet strength of love, the small triumphs hidden in pain. In the audience, Alexander sat still, his usually sharp expression softened. The sound surrounded him, tender, powerful, and real. He had attended hundreds of performances before, but none had ever felt like this. It wasn't polished perfection. It was honesty, vulnerability, soul. As the song reached its middle section, the tone shifted. The music became darker, stormier. Elena's hand struck the keys harder, echoing years of frustration, exhaustion, and fear. The melody trembled with emotion, building like thunder before a storm. Then, slowly, it quieted again. A fragile peace emerged, a single trembling tune that rose from the ruins of chaos. It was the sound of her healing, her hope. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't stop. She played through them until the final note hung in the air, long and haunting. And then, silence. Not a cough, not a whisper, not a breath. For one long, perfect moment, the entire hall was frozen. Even the air felt still. Elena could feel hundreds of hearts beating with hers, all listening to that fading echo. Then someone began to clap. Just one person at first, then another, and another. Within seconds, the hall erupted into applause. Thunderous, wild, endless. People rose to their feet. Flowers were thrown onto the stage. Cameras flashed. Elena sat there, stunned. Her hands shook above the piano keys. She could barely see through the blur of her tears. She rose slowly and turned toward the audience, bowing deeply. When she lifted her head, her eyes met Alexander's. He was standing, clapping, his expression unreadable. But in his gaze, there was no pride or arrogance, only quiet respect. After the concert, Elena slipped away from the crowd, escaping through a side hallway into the quiet backstage corridor. Her heart was still racing, her mind still caught between disbelief and joy. She walked toward the small dressing room where her things were, but before she could reach it, she heard footsteps behind her. "Elena," she turned. It was Alexander. He had removed his suit jacket, his tie loose, his face unguarded. He paused, struggling for the right words. "That was something I've never heard before." She smiled softly, her voice trembling. "You forced me to play once. Tonight I chose to." He nodded, a small, genuine smile appearing, and that made all the difference. They stood there in silence for a moment. Then Elena said, "Thank you." Not for the money or the school. For the chance, even if you didn't mean to give it at first. Alexander looked at her thoughtfully. Maybe I needed to learn something too, he admitted. That sometimes power can't command beauty. It can only stand still and listen to it. Elena's smile widened, tears glimmering again. Then I suppose we both learned something. He offered a small bow, almost playful. I'll be in the audience again, Miss Torres. But next time I'll know better than to underestimate you. She laughed softly. I think you already know better. When he left, Elena sat alone for a moment, listening to the faint hum of applause still echoing from the hall. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that once carried trays, that once trembled over piano keys in fear, and whispered, almost to herself, I did it, Papa. Outside, the city glittered like 1,000 tiny stars, and somewhere deep within her she knew the silence that followed her song wasn't emptiness. It was the world holding its breath in awe. When the applause finally faded and the crowd began to leave, Elena stayed backstage, sitting quietly in front of her open piano. Her fingers traced the keys one last time as if saying goodbye to a friend. The stage lights had dimmed, leaving only the warm glow of a few bulbs. Her body was tired, but her heart felt full. She still couldn't believe what had happened. She had faced her fear, played her truth, and silenced a room full of people who had once looked down on her. For a long time, she just sat there in the quiet, listening to the faint sounds of the audience outside. Footsteps, laughter, the rustle of evening gowns and suits, and somewhere among them she knew was Alexander Vale. She didn't know if she would ever fully understand him. He had humiliated her once, but somehow that moment had also led her back to herself. It was strange how life could twist pain into purpose. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Miss Torres? It was one of the concert organizers, smiling brightly. That was an unforgettable performance. People are asking for you. Reporters, talent agents. Even the head of the National Music Council wants to meet you. Elena blinked, speechless. Me? Yes, you, the woman laughed. You're the story of the night. The words made Elena's heart skip. The story of the night. A year ago, she'd been invisible. A nameless waitress blending into the background of luxury and laughter. Now somehow she was the name everyone was saying. She thanked the organizer softly but asked for a few minutes alone. She needed to breathe. When she finally stepped outside the concert hall into the crisp night air, she could still hear the buzz of the crowd behind her. She pulled her coat around her shoulders and walked down the quiet street toward the park, the same one where she had once practiced on an old, broken piano. The city lights shimmered across the water of the small lake. A street performer played a soft tune on a violin nearby, and she smiled as she dropped a few coins into his case. For a moment it felt peaceful again. No stage, no audience, no pressure. Just music. As she turned to leave, she heard a familiar voice behind her. You disappear after every performance. I'm starting to think it's your tradition. She turned and saw Alexander standing a few feet away. He wasn't in a tuxedo this time. Just a black coat, his tie undone. His eyes, though still sharp, looked gentler now. I thought you'd be surrounded by your rich friends, she said softly, half teasing, half curious. He smiled faintly. They're not really friends. Just people who like the sound of their own applause. She chuckled. And what about you? He met her eyes. I prefer the sound of your piano. Her cheeks warmed. You really have changed, haven't you? He shrugged slightly. Maybe. You reminded me that not everything can be bought. Not silence, not sincerity, not music. They walked along the path together, the quiet hum of the city surrounding them. I saw you talking to the organizers, he said after a moment. They're already offering you contracts, aren't they? She smiled modestly. A few. I don't know what to say to any of them yet. I just wanted to play. I didn't plan for all of this, he nodded. You don't have to rush. The right path will come to you. Just promise me you'll keep playing. I don't think I could stop even if I wanted to, she said. It's the only time I feel completely alive. They reached the small bridge that crossed over the lake. The reflection of the city lights rippled below, golden and soft. For a while they stood there in comfortable silence. Finally Alexander spoke again, his voice quieter. You know, that night at the gala, I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was just bored with my own world. I didn't realize I was about to change someone else's. Elena looked at him, her eyes calm. You did change it. But not because you're powerful or rich or famous. You changed it because you forced me to face something I'd run from, myself. He smiled slightly, almost sadly. Then maybe I did one good thing after all. You did, she said softly. They said nothing for a while, only listening to the sound of the violinist still playing in the distance. The violinist still playing in the distance. The melody floated through the air like a whisper between them. Finally, Alexander straightened. I'll be leaving for Europe soon, he said. Business. I might be gone a long time. Elena nodded. Then I guess this is goodbye. He hesitated, as if wanting to say more. You'll do great things, Elena. Just don't let the world change the way you play. She smiled, tears glistening faintly in her eyes. And you, don't forget what it feels like to listen. He laughed softly, the sound warmer than she had ever heard it before. Then he stepped closer and held out his hand. Goodbye, Miss Torres. She took it, her fingers brushing his. Goodbye, Mr. Vale. He gave a small nod, turned, and walked away into the night. She watched until his figure disappeared among the lights. When she finally turned back toward the city, she felt a strange calm. There was no bitterness left, no anger, only gratitude for the strange, unexpected path that had led her here. She walked home under the quiet glow of streetlights, her heart still full of music. That night before bed, she wrote down a new melody, gentle, hopeful, and warm. She titled it The Silence After the Song. It was not about pain anymore. It was about peace. And as the soft notes played in her mind, Elena realized she wasn't just chasing a dream anymore. She was living it. Months passed since that unforgettable night. The world hadn't stopped talking about the waitress who silenced the rich with one song. Newspapers called her the miracle pianist, and video clips of her performance continued to circle the internet, gathering millions of views. But Elena tried not to think about fame. She still lived in her small apartment with her mother, still made her morning coffee, still walked to the academy every day to practice. She didn't crave attention. She only wanted to keep growing, to keep playing. Yet life had changed. Opportunities began to come like unexpected rain. Invitations from orchestras, offers for interviews, requests for performances in other cities. Some people wanted her story, others wanted her sound. But what mattered most to her was that, for the first time in years, the world wanted her music, not her silence. One afternoon, as she practiced in the empty hall of the conservatory, her teacher approached her with a small envelope. This came for you, he said, smiling. She opened it and her breath caught. Inside was an invitation printed in elegant gold World Piano Festival Vienna, guest performer, Elena Torres, her eyes filled with tears. Vienna, the city her father had once spoken of with wonder. He used to say, if you ever play in Vienna, Lena, it means the world finally heard you. Now that dream was real. Weeks later, Elena stood backstage again, but this time it wasn't a small concert hall. It was the Grand Vienna State Opera, one of the most famous stages in the world. The air buzzed with anticipation. The crowd was international, gathered from across the globe. As she waited for her turn, she thought of her journey. From the girl serving champagne in a glittering hall to the woman about to perform before thousands. Every note she had played, every tear she had shed had brought her here. When her name was announced, she stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. The lights hit her face, warm and blinding, but she didn't feel fear anymore. She felt peace. She sat down at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys, the same way they had the night Alexander had challenged her. But this time there was no trembling, no hesitation. She began to play The Silence After the Song, the piece she had written after the concert. The melody was soft, tender, but full of life, like sunlight after a long storm. The audience listened in complete stillness. Every sound, every emotion she poured into the piano reached them like a whisper of truth. Some smiled, some wiped their tears quietly. Among the faces in the front row, she suddenly noticed someone she hadn't expected. Alexander Vale. He looked older, somehow gentler. When their eyes met for a brief second, he gave a small nod, a silent promise that he had kept his word. He hadn't forgotten how to listen. Elena smiled faintly and kept playing. Her song filled the grand hall with light. When she finished, the silence that followed felt sacred. The same kind of silence that had once defined her life, but now it meant something else. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was respect. It was awe. And then, once again, the applause came. Powerful, unstoppable, and endless. As the crowd rose to their feet, Elena stood and bowed deeply, her eyes shining. She looked toward Alexander one last time. He was standing too, clapping, a proud, quiet smile on his face. Later that night, after the performance ended, Elena went outside into the cool Vienna air. The sky was full of stars. She walked along the quiet street, still in her concert gown, her heart full. A small boy nearby played a tune on an old accordion, his notes uneven but full of heart. Elena smiled, walked up to him, and gently knelt down. "You play beautifully," she said. The boy grinned shyly. "I want to be a real musician someday." She placed a coin in his cup and said softly, "Then never stop playing, no matter who's listening." As she walked away, she thought of her father again, of her mother, of the waitress who once trembled behind a piano. That girl was gone now. In her place stood a woman who had found her voice. Later that week, a newspaper headline read, "Elena Torres, the song that changed everything." But for Elena, it wasn't fame or fortune that changed her life. It was the courage to play that first note, the one she almost didn't play. Back home, when she returned to her small apartment, she found her mother waiting at the door. Her health had improved, her smile brighter. "Did they love it?" her mother asked eagerly. Elena laughed softly and hugged her. "They listened, Mama, really listened." That night, as the two of them sat together with tea, Elena looked out the window at the moonlight spilling across the floor. Music, she realized, wasn't about who heard it. It was about why you played. And when she closed her eyes, she could almost hear her father's voice again. Warm, proud, and filled with love. "See, Lena, you never needed their stage. The song was always yours." She smiled through her tears, whispering into the quiet room, "Thank you, Papa." The night was silent, but it wasn't empty. It was the silence of dreams fulfilled, of hearts at peace, of a melody that had finally found its home. The same silence that once shamed her had now become her greatest applause. Greatest applause.